The biggest geopolitical lesson of the war may not be about Iran, Israel, or even the United States. It may be about China. For years, Gulf states hoped Beijing's growing economic influence would eventually make it a strategic security partner. Instead, China has largely stayed on the sidelines of this conflict. This week, an article in Foreign Affairs magazine argues that the war may have shattered long-held assumptions about Beijing's role in the Middle East. According to the authors, Beijing's wait-and-see approach to the war and unwillingness to use its leverage over Tehran to contain the conflict have disabused Gulf Arab states of any lingering expectation that China could become an important security partner in the foreseeable future. One of the authors of that report joins me now. Aaron Glasserman is a historian of modern China whose research examines Chinese politics and the strategic implications for China's foreign relations. He's a distinguished fellow at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute at Columbia University. Welcome to DW. Let's start with an exploration of those reasons. Why did Gulf states believe China would eventually help to protect the region?
Thanks very much for having me. So I think that in the beginning of this decade, in the early 2020s, there was a new sense of optimism about the role that China might play. I think people were realistic to some extent. They did not think that China was going to come in and play, mirror what the United States has done in the region for many decades. But growing Chinese engagement and reliance on the region, there was an idea that that would translate into a sort of responsible stakeholder mentality. You had growing economic engagement, increased trade. Gulf Cooperation Council countries' trade with China exceeded that with the United States and the EU combined in merchandise trade by 2023. Also, arms deals from China, so there was some expectation that actually in the security realm as well there could be collaboration. And then finally, China's role in brokering the détente and rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran in March of 2023 was also seen as a sign of possibly a more constructive role to be played in the future. So there was a lot of momentum, I would say, and growing engagement. But of course, just a few months after March 2023, with October 7th, 2023, and the spiral of conflicts that have cascaded out of the region since then, we've seen a very different game play out, and it's been a very, I think, sobering reckoning for the Gulf states that might have hoped for a more constructive role.
Different but consistent. China has been publicly reasonable, anti-escalation, pro-ceasefire, critical of Israeli and US military actions. And like I say, this has been its consistent, it seems to have been its consistent approach to conflicts and disputes outside what it considers its sphere of influence. Sell things, develop the markets, stay out of their politics.
Absolutely, and it's a good point. In retrospect, it does look quite consistent. Nevertheless, I think there was some sense that vis-a-vis Iran, China, because and this is something that I think is often underplayed or overlooked altogether, at least in Washington, where there's a tendency to portray China as on Iran's side of the conflict. And in fact, China has close relations and important relationships with both Iran and two of its major regional adversaries or rivals, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So China has always been sort of hedging and on both sides of this thing. I think that the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, though, thought that as their relationship with China grew, at least economically and diplomatically, China would then be more inclined to restrain Iran, and certainly now in the context of open conflict, help pressure it to come to the negotiating table, again, as a responsible stakeholder, not in an interventionist way in the manner that the United States has, but nevertheless do more than it has done.
And on that, what sort of leverage could China exert? What was expected of them?
Well, it's no secret that although Iran's oil has been sanctioned, China is able to purchase great quantities of it on the sort of black market through transshipments through Malaysia, to some extent Oman. And so, as the consumer of something like, upwards of 80% of Iran's crude oil exports, that's a major point of leverage in an economy that is doing quite poorly, to say the least. And so, also diplomatically, China has been an occasional, at least, defender of Iran in the UN Security Council and in other diplomatic forums. So there was some sense that, okay, China has some leverage, and given that they now have a stake in stability in the region, maybe they can use it.
Right. So, taking a cynical view, what's the upside for China? Is there an upside for China in America's war with Iran, or indeed just staying out of it?
There's certainly an upside. I don't think it overwhelms the downside, but to the extent that the United States is distracted from its allies and security concerns in the Indo-Pacific, particularly regarding Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and so forth, that is, at least a silver lining for China, and probably a lot more than that. It's not bad that the United States is using up significant quantities of munitions and other resources, not to mention diverting, military assets and personnel to the Middle East again. So that works in its favor. Nevertheless, I don't think we should overstate the advantage. And I think, all other things equal, China would be very content to have a return to sort of the status quo ante in the region, where it could continue to purchase Iranian oil on the cheap while doing a very profitable business with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with other Gulf Arab states.
OK, so Gulf countries sell China lots of oil and provide China with a lucrative market for Chinese goods, but find Beijing unwilling to help them out when the bombs start falling. Has this prompted those Gulf countries to rethink their relationship with Beijing?
I think it's definitely prompted a reckoning. I think that the economic basis of the relationship is going to continue and may actually expand and strengthen. But there is a coming to terms with what I would call the limits of Chinese partnership. It's never going to look like what partnership with the United States can do, both for better and for worse. And even, at a sort of a marginal level of greater, we have seen China's real preference for staying out of conflict. And that will, I think, affect the way other countries, when they engage with China and seek partnership with it, sort of assess the costs and benefits. So there's a certain level of consistency, to be sure, but I think it's also been a sort of a demonstration of what China is really not willing to do for anyone.
Right. It's easy to talk about the Gulf states, and I think I have the Gulf states, the Gulf countries, and I think I have a couple of times. It's worth remembering that we're talking about a group of countries that are riven with rivalries and that don't necessarily have a united view.
Certainly, and I think that actually divisions are growing rather than becoming closer together. We've seen, on the one hand, I mean, the most recent news in terms of the relationship, the agreement between Saudi Arabia and the United States regarding the nuclear program may be a sign of things shifting back a little bit, but everything's quite tentative. But we've seen the UAE really throwing its lot in much more closely with the United States and Israel. For example, the recent revelations that sharing Iron Dome technology with the UAE, visits of high-ranking Israeli officials there. So that's, definitely a major development. Whereas for Saudi Arabia, it's important to remember it has a security, a defense pact with Pakistan, which is then closely engaged with China. So the region's divergences it's both coming apart and also being pulled in different directions vis-a-vis the United States and China. We'll see now what the nuclear agreement, if it holds, actually does for the United States and Saudi Arabia. But there's definitely new strain within the Gulf between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
OK, so what sort of test, then, has the Iran war been of China's broader claim that it can offer a different kind of global leadership from the United States? Because the Chinese answer to other people's problems seems to be, sort it out yourselves and please keep the noise down.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I think It's important when looking at what's going on in Beijing. It's a combination, I think, of prudence and of paralysis. On the one hand, China has studied the lessons of the United States, as a global power, as the hegemon, and sees a lot that it doesn't want to emulate, a lot of mistakes that it wants to avoid, a lot of costs and pitfalls, and over the overextension and interventionism in multiple theaters simultaneously is definitely at the top of that list. And so there's a real sense that the wise move is to stay out and let other people sort of work things out and swoop in at the end and engage in business and expand our power sort of in that dimension. It's also, though, not just a story of a wise leader in Beijing overseeing historical developments in the rest of the world. I think also there's real paralysis, and we've seen, for example, just in the beginning of this year, major purges in China's top military leadership bodies. I was recently in Beijing in June, and in conversations with colleagues there, an interlocutor brought up, this is not a time when it's easy for sort of, because of domestic politics in Beijing, to make a big move or to really sort of take a risk or change course. So it's really both paralysis because of China's sort of complex domestic politics and prudence because the United States continues to demonstrate that its brand of interventionism is extremely costly.
Good talk. And thanks for joining us. Aaron Glasserman from the Weatherhead East Asian Institute at Columbia University.
Thanks very much.